All right, let's get started. Good morning. And because this session is recorded, maybe good afternoon, good evening. It all depends on when you are watching the recording. This is a session of about 2 hours. I will not do any break. I'll need the 2 hours, I guess. This session is all about going from SPLA to Azure, thanks to Arc and thanks to CSP, of course. Anyway, it's all about transitioning from the service provider license agreement to a CSP license agreement for running resources on premises, in your own data center as a hoster, in a private data center of a customer, or wherever you typically want to deploy your resources, including Azure, of course. That's what we will be discussing today. My name is Yves Kerwijn. I'm not going to read all this, but I always love to stress the second bullet, that I get energy from making others successful. So this session is all about making you successful by leveraging CSP, by leveraging Azure Arc for making your customers successful at the end of the day. And I love to contribute to that. For the rest, as you can read, I've been around for a while. I just rejoined Microsoft, let's say 1 month ago, after being 10 years a freelancer. Prior to that, I used to work already for Microsoft for 17 years. And now, again, I'm back in a new role at Microsoft, fully focused on Azure, fully focused on you as a partner being successful with Azure in the coming years. So we'll meet again for sure also after this presentation. That being said, let's get started. The agenda is as follows. I will start with a high-level set of, I think, 3 slides introducing, if it is new to you, the concept of what Microsoft calls the adaptive cloud. And then I've been adding some new slides I actually created only yesterday. That's what I call the Azure value story, where I explain from a high-level perspective why you will probably want to go from an SPLA licensing scheme to a CSP licensing scheme, and actually introducing, by doing so, the Azure Arc value. And that's what I will be doing in the next section. Then I have quite a lot of slides where I explain with a lot of detail how you can monetize all this and how you can earn money with all this. And as you will see, there is a lot of means, there is a lot of incentives, there is a lot of things that Microsoft is offering us as a partner, as a hoster, as a MSP, as a customer even, to actually have more value if you go away from SPLA and actually use CSP with Azure Arc. And that's what I will be explaining. I will also go in a little bit of detail on the incentives that are related to that, making sure that you understand that. Because most of us, I know very well, most of us, we have quite some problems in really fully understanding how you can monetize all this. I will also go a little bit deeper on everything related to SQL Server, because SQL Server is typically still one of the most popular workloads that is running in your data center as a hoster in the data center, the private data center of the customer, using SPLA. Next to, of course, Windows. Think about RDS. I think these two, RDS and SQL Server, are the Windows Server actually, and SQL Server and Windows Server, typically for remote desktop services, are the typically most used scenarios where SPLA is used. But I will zoom into the SQL Server story a little bit. Then I will discuss the 10 ways to reduce Azure costs, because once you go that road, you stay on premises in your own data center, but still you use Azure Arc. And then the nice thing is that on top of of all the benefits that I will be discussing, the monetization benefits, still there are a lot of means for you to reduce cost. It's even more benefits on top of all that. Then I said SQL Server is a well-known workload in this context. Another workload is removed desktop services. And there, typically, we will want to talk about AVD. And I will introduce, if it's new to you, new hybrid options for AVD, also again in this context. I will end with a brief overview of Jumpstart. Our Jumpstart, that will probably something be that you will want to check out, especially if you are technical. Let's get started. Advancing hybrid cloud to adaptive cloud. Well, it is all about the reality that our customers are facing today. And as a customer, you realize that you want to deliver products more and more as a service, as an online service, as a subscription. You want to transform data into new products. You want to monetize data into new products. You want to modernize your organization. You want to reinvent yourself as a customer, as a company in this modern times. In all that, you typically want to try things. You want to have applications developed. You want to have websites developed. You want to have agents most probably developed. And you will want to do it as fast as possible. You want to fail fast and try something else. That is a reality that we all are facing, and especially our customers. They also want to become agile in this new world. They want to use new technologies as fast as possible and experiment and constantly adopt the realities. And all that, you will want to do that as a customer, just like us, as a partner of Microsoft, in a secure way. And you want to govern all that in a very modernized, in a very modern and efficient way. So this is actually the reality. And the reality is not just about Azure. The reality is about other public clouds, like Google's public cloud, like Amazon's public cloud. It is, of course, still about your private data center or your hoster data center or the private data center of the customer. So the reality is that all this comes on top of using these digital places in the most convenient way. And a very important point that will come back many times is that you will want to manage all that from a single control pane. And that is for sure one of the most important points also to remember already now as part of this presentation. So visually, that's what you see here, is that this typically comes down to a multi-cloud environment, to a hybrid environment, to IoT, to edge, to distributed. The problem with all that is that each of these domains, each of these topics here come with their own technology stack, with their own management tools, with their own skills that you will have to require. And that is actually the problem we are facing today. We need actually a system that brings all that together, that allows you to manage multi-cloud environment, hybrid environments, edge distributed in a very efficient, cost-effective, secure way. And that is a reality that we want to cope with what we call the adaptive cloud. Hybrid cloud is, you understand very well what hybrid cloud is, and adaptive cloud is very much about a cloud stack, a cloud solution. And as you will see, thanks to Azure Arc, that allows us to manage this hybrid, distributed, edge, whatever IoT world, multi-cloud world, in a very adaptive way. And that's typically what Microsoft calls the adaptive cloud. The adaptive cloud is made possible with what you can see there on top, Azure Arc. We'll come back many times on what Azure Arc is, what it can do for you. And remember already today, in its basic functionality, Azure Arc is free of charge. So it comes with a lot of features that are not free of charge, but especially if you want to modernize your data center, your own data center, and you want to start manage your own data center using Azure, that's where you will want to use Azure Arc for. And you can do that at no cost, basically, as you will see. So Azure Arc is what brings this single control plane to multi-cloud, to your hosting data center, to the private data centers, allowing you to use all these services like Azure Update Manager, we'll discuss, Azure Policy, Azure Monitor, Defender for Cloud, of course, all the things that you see here and many more of the capabilities that have been uniquely only available for Azure resources. You will be able to use all these things in the context of resources, in the context of workloads that are running in your data center or in another public cloud or in the private data center of the customer. That is what Azure Arc makes possible. And we'll come back to the point of SPLA in a moment, because to make that all possible, you probably want to change from SPLA to CSP, as we will discuss. And on the left side, you actually see that doing so requires Windows Server, probably SQL Server, Linux Server, Kubernetes clusters, whatever server you can think of. It could even be a physical server. That's the whole point. Whatever workload we are talking about. And this slide is absolutely not complete because I could also have included here all kinds of what they call Arc-enabled services. Because the future is not only about using these Azure services to manage your workloads, but it's also about taking, for instance, the SQL database and bring it to your own data center, run it in your own data center, so an Azure service, and many of the Azure services you will be able to run in your own data center and still manage them from the cloud. This is actually what Azure Arc makes possible. It's a very high-level overview slide. If you do not fully understand it, don't worry. We'll come back to this point many times later. But now let's start with my new pitch I created yesterday, which I hope will be appreciated, which will and should help you a lot in even better understand the value of going from SPLA to CSP. First of all, SPLA is a licensing model. I don't think I need to explain too much what it is. It's a licensing model that exists already quite some time, more than 10 years, I think 15 years or something like that. I remember my colleagues at Microsoft, Laurent de Grauwe, some of you might still know him, launching that in Belgium and talking to the hosters in Belgium to help them actually host workloads based on Windows, based on SQL Server, in their own data center as a hoster and leveraging the SPLA licensing mode. Now, remember, Azure is a business model. It's very important to understand that. I will make sure that you understand it very much. SPLA is a licensing model. We'll come back to it. But Azure is much more than just a licensing model. It's much more than putting things in the cloud, as you will see. It is really a completely different business model. Keep that in mind as a very high-level thing to understand my point here. As an SPLA partner, you probably agree that margins are under pressure. I'm talking about Windows, SQL, RDS, all still very important, all still things that you probably run in your data center. But yeah, becoming rich or earning money in general based on just that is not easy. The value that you realize with that from a margin perspective is very much under pressure. One of the things with SPLA is that you need to stay compliant, and you typically get at some point in time an audit on whether you actually did typically manually report the number of SQL servers, the number of SQL cores, the number of Windows servers you are actually using, because that is how SPLA works. It is about you, the partner of Microsoft, the hoster, reporting to Microsoft what you are actually using. And yeah, of course, we do our best. We try and we really want to be and stay compliant, but probably that's not always the case, and that's not always that easy to do. And then, of course, in order to be a hoster, you need hardware. The problem with hardware is you buy hardware, it's physical, and it's there, and you will need to use it for the next at least 3 to 5 years. It's capex, and making mistakes at that point in time is dangerous. You cannot say, "Well, we bought this hardware, but it's not useful anymore for the new customers we are about to onboard." That is also certainly one of the challenges you have as a hoster. I'm not saying that it is fully in line with the story I'm going to tell you here, because at the end of the day, the story is still about keep things in your data center, keep things in the private data center, but leverage Azure to be successful in all that. Then the other thing is, of course, think about platform as a service. That is something I've been saying already for many years. If we think about platform as a service, about not infrastructure as a service, but platform as a service services, that is typically something you cannot implement, offer from your own hosting environment. The typical thing we do as a hoster is infrastructure as a service. All kinds of platform as a service services, like, for instance, a SQL database, offering it as not as a virtual machine, but really as a service, a platform service that you can activate. And especially if you think about things like Fabric, where you could even spin off a database by using SaaS. All these things are not that easy, almost impossible for a typical hoster to offer. And then we are not yet talking about AI, of course. Offering AI services from within your hosting infrastructure is certainly possible, but doing that is a very expensive exercise, and you'll face a lot of competition, especially from the public cloud. So it's not really easy to do so. And then, of course, we have the VMware Broadcom changes that are destabilizing our business model, our hosting business model. These are certainly some of the challenges that you will recognize, where again, typically doing all that through SPLA is probably not the best solution. SPLA was perfect for 10 or at least 10 to 15 years ago, but it is certainly not the answer anymore for the world we are living in today. It is designed for hosting Windows and SQL Server in a partner-owned data center, simply. And it's typically built for static, very important, license-based workloads. And certainly not designed for consumption-based, AI-driven cloud reality. Now, in the traditional SQL Server licensing process, how does it work? I think you know that very well. As a hoster, you acquire SPLA licenses, and then you provision basically physical servers with Hyper-V or VMware, with Windows and SQL Server. And it is then your responsibility, that is very important, to keep things scalable, to keep things available, to keep things backed up, to keep things secure, to patch things. That is what you do as a hoster. It's not just about the license, it's not just about the hardware you need to maintain, it's also about the software you need to maintain. And that's certainly part of the cost that you take as a hoster. And then, of course, at the end of each month, you report to Microsoft your usage of SQL Server in this case. That is how it works today. Now, with Azure Arc, you keep things on premises, just like what you did before. You're not using SPLA for everything. For some part of your workload, Windows, maybe for some Windows servers, you might still continue to use SPLA. But for more and more of the workloads, Windows and especially SQL Server, you start to use consumption-based model. You start to buy CSP licenses instead of SPLA licenses for the workloads like Windows and SQL Server that you run in your own data center. And by using Azure Arc, remember, you connect it to Azure, to the Azure cloud. And from then on, you start to get a lot of benefits. And one of them, of course, is a consumption-based model where you don't need to report manually anymore about what you're actually using. And also this relates very much to what you will actually be paying. So how does that work? You transition your customer to pay-as-you-go license via CSP. So you create an Azure environment subscription, basically, to a CSP license as a partner. You use the partner center for the billing and the pricing, and you enable the customer to consume metered billing of SQL Server via Azure Arc. So that's the beauty. You don't buy upfront SPLA licenses. You don't report about the number of SPLA licenses you have been using the last month. You simply have your SQL Server via Azure Arc connected to Azure, and there the metering starts for the pay-as-you-go bill that you will get. That's how it works. Now, the traditional tracking, the track of SQL Server utilization is done automatically, so you reduce compliance risks, and all that is, of course, done in a very automated way. But very important, and that's what I will come back to many times, it's not just about the compliance thing. It's not just about the reporting and the automated metering. It's not just about the licensing. It's not just about an alternative licensing scheme to SPLA. It's much more related to the extra services that you will be able to use. An extra service that you will able to sell to the customer, where you will also again earn a lot of money, and that's what I will explain as part of my session here. And of course, Azure Lighthouse even allows you to manage, for instance, from a security perspective, all your customers from a single pane of glass, even while you're managing multiple Azure subscriptions from multiple customers. Voilà. And that's the point here. It is all about, not just about the licensing scheme and the way you meter stuff. It's very much more about the manageability. It's a complete other way of operating your data center, your physical data center, once you connect it to Azure Arc and once you start using the CSP licensing scheme. For instance, you have indeed, from an observability perspective, one single pane of glass to both see and basically manage your SQL Server instances running in your data center, running in the data center of your customer, and running in Azure. And you actually start to leverage, and that's what certainly also in my slides here, the Azure services that I will discuss in a moment to do that in a very modern way. This is very much about managed availability groups. It's about your inventory. It's about tagging. It's about doing assessments. It's about automated backup and restores, of course. And it's very much about things like the Defender for Cloud, all kinds of stuff I will be discussing later, including how Entra ID is being used here. Think about MFA, think about inbound, outbound, managed identities, a very rich solution that goes far beyond what you could be doing today solely on SPLA. I also created this slide. In an SPLA model, it's very much about the licenses. It's about running Windows and SQL Server and report about what you have been using the last month. And it's an SPLA licensing model. In Azure, it's much more than just about another way of paying for what you're using. First of all, you pay for what you're actually using without having to report, yes, but it's much more about implementing realizing outcomes and offering extra services or using extra services in your own data center to become more successful and to become more future proof towards your customers. It is not anymore about linear growth. What I mean with linear growth is that there is a one-to-one relationship between the number of customers you have and the number of customers you help and the cost you have to take in order to realize that. Once you use the Azure model, as I will explain, it's not linear anymore. You will be able to provide all kinds of extra outcomes and services for which you typically do not need to take these upfront costs that you would typically need to do if you would want to realize the same thing in a purely non-Azure connected world. Technically, theoretically, you'd be able to realize the same things also without SPLA, without Azure Arc, without Azure, but there would be a linear relationship between what it would cost you in order to realize that. Realizing the things that customers want today, remember my very first slide, by using the Azure model, even by keeping things on premises, that's the whole point, is what we enable through the Azure model. And then, of course, it is about, you take all the risk. You are responsible for every single part of, your data center. A little bit what I said with linear growth, there is this relationship with what you want to realize. In the Azure model, there are many means, there are many things that are being provided to you. I'll discuss them to help you earn money, to realize value and actually get paid by Microsoft even to realize the value. Microsoft is actually co-investing in you. It's not just you taking the risk, you doing all the investments, Microsoft investing in you. PEC stands for Partner Earned Credits, CSP incentives I will talk about. Some of you might have a DCO contract with Microsoft or with your distributor, like with TD SYNNEX, of course. And there is, of course, Azure Accelerate, which provides you incentives both in pre-sales and in post-sales, and even offers you to do migrations for you without you having to take the cost. There are certainly incentives, to be honest, I don't know which ones, but it's very limited because it's not the kind of services that we position as strategic, and there are really no interesting incentives anymore to do SPLA. But there are a lot of growth-based incentives. We'll talk about growth-based incentives as part of the Azure model today. So Azure is not cheaper infrastructure. Azure is about a different business model. I keep that in mind. It's not like Microsoft pushing everything to the cloud and pushing everything to Azure. No, it's about doing the transition on your terms, as Microsoft loves to tell you. Even keep things for good reasons, typically on premises in your own data center, in the data center of the customer, but leverage Azure as a completely other way, more modern, more sophisticated way of doing business in the cloud. Here you see basically a summary of what I said. The incentives and the margins, you have the earned credit, and PEC is all about getting, it's not a reduction on your price, but it's a reduction. It's you get your invoice from Microsoft, and but for those Azure subscriptions that you are not a partner of record, but the partner, what is it, the PAL? You are actually I always forget the name. The PAL, some of you might say what it is. I forgot what PAL stands for. But for those share for those subscriptions that you are the partner of record, let's say, and you can have multiple partners of record for a subscription, you get credits. You get actually a reduction on your invoice. There are the CSP incentives I will be discussing. There is also for some of you the DCA contract that you might have that also comes with a reduction in the price. And there is, of course, what I said, the pre-sales, the post-sales services that Microsoft provides. So with SPLA, the partner funds everything. With Azure, Microsoft co-invests and funds the transition. And then, of course, from a control and compliance perspective, Azure gives more control than SPLA. That's the whole point. As you will see, a lot of these services are very much related to, manage your infrastructure in your data center, in those data centers, in the public cloud. And that also comes with a lot of compliance features. Think about Defender for Cloud that you will be able to leverage in such a setup. It also gives you a lot of cost management things. I'll discuss like a 10 top things that you can do to manage cost also, the kind of cost management features that you don't have when using SPLA, when not connecting to Azure. And of course, things like tagging policies and governance by design, which are actually, well, especially the tagging, free services as part of Azure Arc. That comes really at no price, especially tagging and policies. That through Azure Policy, you can start to create central policies that apply to both your Azure hosted workloads, but certainly also apply to the same policies also apply to the things that you roll out in your own data center. From a governance perspective, this is certainly what you mean in this complex world. It's built with built-in security. I'll talk about extended security. We talk about Defender. And of course, the whole thing about the value of Azure. Azure simplifies audits instead of creating them. Also keep that in mind. The risk of doing nothing is simply, if you do nothing, you keep everything licensed to SPLA, you can do that. But then you're actually excluding a lot of innovation opportunities that you're not leveraging towards your customer. That puts you probably in a not so competitive position. Also, RDS, it has had its time. With RDS, you can typically not provide the kind of remote desktop services that people are expecting from a modern computer in the cloud. And that is actually what you can realize with AVD. As I will explain, AVD is not anymore just about running your session host at Microsoft in the cloud. You will be able also to run, even on Nutanix, on your own data center, the session hosts in your own data center, but manage them, deploy them, secure them, maintain them from within Azure. And then, of course, once more, everything related to Copilot, Fabric, PaaS, it simply doesn't exist in SPLA. Public cloud restrictions already apply to a lot of SPLA scenarios. Standing still is the real risk. As a last slide in this pitch, how do you start? I'll give you a lot of information as part of the rest of my slide deck. Start with SQL Server. SQL via Azure Arc. That's you could start by deploying SQL Server from within Azure Arc in your own data center, or you could have already the SQL Server running in your data center and start license it through a pay-as-you-go license, not anymore by using SPLA, but using CSP license, and manage it, keep it secure, and so on through Azure Arc. Same thing for RDS, backup and disaster recovery, security attached. They mean Defender for Cloud, all kinds of things that are low risk, that are easy to adopt, that are easy to add without really doing a real migration to the cloud. You start to leverage Azure benefits, the consumption-based licensing model, let's say, but also a lot of other benefits that are probably much more important than the licensing part of the story. So Azure adoption is a journey. It's not a switch, and you can actually start small in a way. Start with low, no risk as a first step. Yeah. So in a way, SPLA helped you as a host to build your hosting business, and probably, it is a very successful journey until now. Huh? Azure helps you now to scale it, to go to the next level. That's how you should look at it. Huh? And in that context, SPLA is not anymore the licensing scheme you will go for. You will go for a CSP license. You go for a consumption-based license, which again is not only about the licensing story, but it's much more also about the services, the extra services that you will be able to leverage and provide actually to your customers by doing so, without even having to migrate to the cloud. How beautiful is that? Huh? So typical Azure Arc opportunities, high level, of course, in that sequence actually are SQL Server. That's the most frequent one. The other typically opportunity is extended security updates. If you are running Windows and SQL Server that don't get any updates anymore, also not through SA, then Azure Arc will bring you extended security updates still at an interesting price point that you can leverage. VMware, of course, the VMware Broadcom driven Arc landing, as I call it here, is of course a very important one. And then of course, if you are looking, and I think that's in a way probably the most important one, if you're looking for a single pane of glass, you still want to maintain a lot of services, workloads in your own data center, but the cloud is also there for you, for your customers, and it doesn't make sense that you use all kinds of other technology stacks, all kinds of other monitoring tools for each of the places where you are hosting workloads. Azure Arc provides us indeed this single pane of glass. And another example, but probably not as relevant in SMB, is Kubernetes. If you are deploying a Kubernetes cluster, you have many options there to do so. But indeed, also deploying a Kubernetes cluster, and by doing so, you even are able to use Microsoft Azure services that are being made available as containers and run things that were until recently only available through Azure, in Azure, run them actually, think about Azure Functions as an example, and run Azure Functions in your own data center and pay for it through a consumption-based licensing scheme through CSP, not anymore SPLA. So a typical Azure Arc opportunity is about land without migration. Think about SQL, ESU, and indeed, once more, what I think the most important point is the governance on existing infrastructure with an Azure consumed revenue today, but tomorrow, because also that's a way to, because running things in your own data center, manage things in your own data center through Azure Arc is great. But it's typically only the first step, because what you will gradually be doing is start migrating things fully to the cloud. Not everything, but some things you will start to fully migrate to the cloud to even have a more optimized setup towards your customer, and also from a monetizing perspective. So in a way, it's the best possible first step to go that road. A step even before the lift and shift, in a way, even before doing the re-hosting, as we tend to call it today. So that's the kind of slides I created yesterday. So non-technical slides, but high-level slides to convince non-technical people. Now let's go a little bit deeper on the technology. How to effectively monetize Azure Arc. What is Azure Arc? Well, it's a bridge. Azure Arc extends Azure services to customers in their existing on-premises, multi-cloud, and edge environments. There is a word missing on my slide. So you use Azure Backup, you use Azure Policy, you use auto-managed, as we used to call it, from Azure, which are Azure services, which have been designed originally for resources running in Azure, but you start to leverage these services and apply them on resources that are running in your own data center or the data center of the customer. That is what Azure Arc makes possible. And the most common use cases are extending, what I say, Defender for Cloud, Azure Monitor, and Microsoft Sentinel. But that's just a very limited list. I'll give you a complete list as part of this session. And another one, of course, is the extended security updates to your existing or their existing environments. Now, let's go a little bit deeper on that. So it's a bridge, but this bridge most importantly provides you this single control pane. And also, why is this important? That's the point I just made. It is something you do typically before actually do the lift and shift. And I'm not saying that you will be lifting and shifting everything to the cloud. Maybe for VMware, probably you will do so. But then again, some of the things will keep on premises, but for even those things that you will migrate at the end of the day, at some point in time, the first step is connect the workload, Windows SQL Server, through Azure Arc to Azure, so you can start managing it from the cloud, including doing the assessments, including doing the modeling on what would be the best PaaS, IaaS option, SaaS option, even in the cloud, if we actually will do the migration. So also look at it like this. And with Arc, all resources can be managed in Azure Arc, creating a single control where customers can operate workloads across all environments. So it's not just limited to what is running in your data center, the customer's data center in Azure, but also all other places can be managed through that. Okay. Now this slide, I already showed it before. This is one of my favorite slides. But you actually see here, it's not completely the same slide as I showed you before. So here below you see wherever you want to deploy things in your own data center, the middle one, doesn't matter. You can deploy Windows and SQL and Linux and Kubernetes clusters, whatever you can think of. What you see on the left in my slide, it's what I call Arc-enabled infrastructure. You need to install something on the Windows server, you need to add something on the Linux server, and all of a sudden from Azure Arc, via Azure Arc, from Azure, you are able to manage the Azure Arc-enabled infrastructure. And here on the right side, they talk about Arc-enabled services like Azure Functions, like Logic Apps. Think about Azure Web Services, App Services, to run whatever stack you want to use to create a website. All these things can also, as containers, be deployed in your data center, in a Kubernetes cluster, and also these things are managed through Azure Arc. And this is an example of PaaS services that you do not typically still have available and run and offer to your customers from within your data center. But thanks to Azure Arc, you will start to be able to offer also PaaS services next to infrastructure as a service services in your data center. So this is what comes on top of Azure Monitor, Azure Policy, all the things I will be discussing in a moment to manage your infrastructure, but you can also start to deploy other Azure native services in your own infrastructure or even in another public cloud and manage it through a single control pane. I know that some people still struggle to understand and fully understand this picture because it's almost too nice to be true, but this is what Azure Arc makes available. And again, the story is here about going from SPLA to Azure. All this is only possible if you leave behind SPLA for some of your servers workloads and start to leverage a CSP model. Through a CSP, you make this all possible. I'll give you much more information on that. Now, what is the monetizing model? There are many. First of all, you deploy Azure Arc, and that's free of charge. It's something you activate in the cloud in Azure, and you have Azure Arc. Yeah, and then as part of Azure Accelerate, I'm not going to give a full presentation about the MCI incentives of Microsoft, but if you are talking about a customer, your customer, that is at least deploying for 1 year something that would give you $15,000 in Azure consumed revenue. So if you have an opportunity where you say, well, this opportunity, if you use Azure Arc, even for keeping things on premises, keep that in mind. You will actually generate ACR, Azure Consumed Revenue. I will explain later how. Well, if you forecast that that will be at least 15,000 euros or dollar, you can get an incentive from Microsoft for doing the pre-sales job, doing the assessment and the proof of value. 2,000 euros, by the way. So that is the first thing. It's 15,000 actually also. But okay, in order to do that, you need, of course, the MSP expert specialization, and you need an opportunity that is at least 15,000 euros. Keep that in mind. But that, again, is certainly a monetizing model that you should not underestimate. The other thing is, if you do then the actual migration, the post-sales activity, well, also for doing the post-sales, and there the 15,000 minimum ACR is not applied. It is only 5,000 euro. So if you have an opportunity where you forecast 5,000 euro ACR for 1 year for that project, you can apply for post-sale financial incentive of indeed part of the Azure Accelerate. You don't need a specialization for that, actually. You simply need a designation. But again, I'm not going to discuss that at length here. But that's also something you do not have when applying SPLA. It doesn't stop there. Part of the actual migration and even part of the pre-sales work, the assessment that you saw on the left one, can be done by Microsoft itself to the Cloud Accelerate Factory, which is part of also our Azure Accelerate incentive, where Microsoft is actually doing the pre-sales and the post-sales world work. You are not being invoiced for that. You are free to invoice your customer for that. And these three together are all part of Azure Accelerate and will actually show that Microsoft invests in the risk that it's not risk, in the things that need to be done in order to go the road. But it doesn't stop there. And most probably, this is not the reason why you will want to go away for some of your workloads from SPLA. This is only like candy in a way. This should make it a no-brainer, taking away the last doubts about why not doing it. Or let's put it differently, many of you partners keep money on the table by not doing this. This is like easy money in a way for you to leverage. But the real value is here. Once you then have deployed Azure Arc free of charge, you can start leveraging the Arc paid services. I will discuss all the Arc paid services in a moment. And that's where you start to make what you are doing much more sophisticated. And also towards the customer, you start to do things that if you would want to realize the same thing on premises purely with SPLA, it would theoretically almost be impossible. I'll discuss the paid services, and paid services means also your service, of course. On top of that, of course, by using the SQL or Windows Server pay-as-you-go option through CSP, you're actually, as I will explain later in slides, ACR. By you doing ACR, you get actually all kinds of incentives from Microsoft that makes your margin even more interesting. And don't underestimate that. You don't have that with SPLA. And then, of course, the extended security. is one of the things that you can sell. And then, of course, your own services for a real hybrid cloud environment where you start to leverage Azure cloud manageability and security and governance features to manage the workloads of your customers in a much more modern and much more sophisticated way. And you are not doing that free of charge, without you having to do the investments that would typically require if you would want to do it. I like this slide. It took me a while to create it. Well, now for Windows and SQL Server, let's go a little bit deeper on some pricing information, high level. So, pricing, to give it a much more tangible feeling. First of all, you have servers and clusters in your own data center, in the data center of the customer, right? And then you probably have licenses, L-only licenses, no software assurance. Now, that is a situation that most of the resources you use, you have. It's not even without SPLA. Now, the point is, if you have an L-only perpetual license, then at no additional cost, you can enable the Windows or SQL Server and get all these features for free. And one of the examples I gave was the tagging, for instance, and the role-based access I will discuss, the integration in the resource graph, with management groups, and then apply at the management groups level all kinds of Azure policies. These things are free of charge. Even ARM templates allowing you to deploy things in your own data center on the Windows server to ARM templates. These things are all free of charge. Managing the billing and the licensing of your SQL servers, manage the inventory of your SQL servers, the migration assessment, that is part not just about Azure Migrate, but as part of Azure Arc, are all free of charge services. Things that you can start to leverage toward your customer to have a higher value for what you have already paid for, because this is all free of charge. So there is not even a discussion about SPLA here. This is just, and then if you have SA, software assurance, or you start to pay through CSP for Windows 2025, or even the older versions of SQL Server, you start to have a lot of extra features that are still there at no additional cost. So this is what I mean with all kinds of services that Azure provides you that you can start leveraging to manage your infrastructure, on-premises infrastructure, in a much more sophisticated way through the single pane of glass. This one already should convince you. So this is not even, especially if you start to switch from SPLA to pay-as-you-go, because that is what you will want to aim for at some point in time. You get all these free services. And as you will see, once you switch from SPLA to CSP pay-as-you-go, and all the other options like reserved instances and things like that, you will see that you start to generate ACR and get all kinds of incentives from Microsoft. The story gets even better if you start to leverage all the extra services that are being provided from Azure that until recently were only available for resources, workloads running in the Microsoft data center. Now these resources can now also be used in your data center. Of course, not free of charge, but again, these things generate ACR, provide you incentives, and it's also an earning model. It's almost too good to be true. Not sure how better a slide could be to convince you about how SPLA was great, but it's not future ready, right? It's not future proof. Now, the no additional cost for it's just a screenshot. I like this one. Let's zoom out. So this is Azure Arc. And what you see here in Azure Arc, I see here a list of of basically servers, and I'm selecting one of the servers, and I can activate these free services like remote support, the Windows Admin Center, Azure machine configuration. Think about things like configuration drift. Well, configuration drift, things like machine configuration and Azure change tracking and inventory. That are the services, especially also the update manager. I'm not talking about the WSUP that we used to have before, but about Azure Update Manager. These things are free, and these things are not like a luxury. These things are what you typically need in order to manage a very sophisticated data center. You could do that with other control planes, with other stacks of technologies, but don't go there, right? You need one single pane, and that's what is being provided for you free of charge. If you manage it, another slide that shows actually a little bit more detail. So here from bottom up, you see your third-party infrastructure, VMware, on-premises, Nutanix, multi-cloud, whatever. On top of that, you typically have Hyper-V, Red Hat, SUSE, and you have virtual machines, right? That doesn't contribute clearly to your ACR as a partner, as a hoster. But once you start adding these not free services, and there you see what they cost, and this is based on a slide deck that I created last year in December. Prices will probably have changed a little, but then again, not a lot. You will see that it gives you a total, if you combine all these things, I'll come with a little bit more detail later, with a $30 per server per month. And again, you get incentives both from from CSP and from MCI on that, and that is interesting to know. By the way, this is a source of this slide deck, or this slide that I created based on the information that I found there. A little bit more detail, just to make sure that you understand the Defender for Cloud. And you have Plan 1, Plan 2. I'm not going to explain what Plan 1 and Plan 2 is, but you get the point. The more sophisticated your defense needs to be for resources running in your data center, you will go to Plan 2. Typically, Defender for Cloud is about three things. It's about your infrastructure as code that is being monitored and is kept secure, and where you can, before even deploying anything, you have Defender of Cloud that is making sure that the deployment scripts, let's say, whatever you're using, are really secure. Then, of course, you have your what they call your security posture, your default configuration of your SQL Server, for instance. That should be using best practices. That is what they call typically the cloud security posture feature that you do in a proactive way. And then you have the reactive stuff where you have real-time monitoring of your services, that you go more and more to Plan 2, specific real-time monitoring and even mitigations through Defender of Cloud. Azure Monitor for log analytics, the metrics, the alerts, notifications, automatic notifications, automatic running, even Power Automate flows and other automations to actually monitor and react automated to things that happen. Also, that is something that you will want to leverage. If you want to connect other cloud or non-cloud resources and bring them into a very sophisticated SIM system, the incident and event management system, security incident and event management system, that is not only monitoring the Microsoft stuff, but is also monitoring other stuff through connectors. You can actually leverage Sentinel, and that also is a thing that you can actually use on top of things that are running on premises. Already explained Azure Update Manager. Think about also hot patching, a very nice thing, and very related to that, the machine configuration to Azure policy and automation with the change tracker is certainly one important thing. I'm explaining here something that might read a little bit difficult to understand. The point is, and I'm showing like this, that these features, if you go for Defender for Cloud Plan 2, for a server, for instance, then automatically these two things are free of charge. So Update Manager and Auto Azure Machine Configuration, is it called? Not Auto Manage, they changed the name. These things are then free of charge. So these prices do not apply if you have, for a server, for instance, that is running on premises, a Defender for Cloud Plan 2. If not, for some of them, you might use just the auto manage features. That's what is allowed. Voilà. For Windows Server, just to give you an idea, and it was on the slide already, it's not just about monthly rates, but it's also about hour rate. If you start to use a CSP license, and of course it needs to be Windows Server 2025, and then you can have an hourly rate of what you see there on the slide in euros. And again, this is pricing from December last year. And that is actually the CSP model. You do not report anymore to Microsoft your SPLA licenses. You actually, through Azure Arc, you have a real-time monitoring system that sees what you're doing, and automatically you get the invoice. And remember, this generates ACR, generates incentives, generates a lot of incentives for you. I have a slide deck on that, a few slides on that. High-level explanation why you will want to do that. Of course, you will not want to do that, especially not for all Windows servers. But for some of them, it certainly makes sense because for some of that, you still want to do CapEx, but for some of them, you will want to shift to OpEx. If you're more CapEx, you will probably love CapEx because of EBITDA. If you want to have a more OpEx model, you go for pay-as-you-go. You get more options. That's the point. You are able to optimize the way you are being invoiced by Microsoft, and it's up to you to decide. It's not that we kill SPLA. It is still there. Optimize upfront cost. If the point what I made, if you want to realize more value to customers, the linear relationship between value and cost, well, by using pay-as-you-go, you have actually no upfront cost. And sometimes you might have periodic consumption. That's certainly a typical scenario. Think about using Azure Monitor to see automatically that some of your resources are not being used, that you shut them down automatically to some script. And that's typically something you can do from Azure. And that's the whole point why you will want to go that. For SQL Server, the same story. There you see for Standard Edition, Enterprise Edition, the same slides actually as before, the same explanation. But you see that there is an hourly rate. And there you see available for SQL 2014, 16, 17, 2019, 22. And the traditional licensing options are still available, remember, that's what I said, but this model is certainly interesting. So going from SPLA to CSP and connect everything through Azure Arc gives you, from a pure licensing perspective, these prices. For the extended security updates, here you have from actually this website again, the pricing. Again, the data center monthly rate, or the what you see here, the standard, depending on whether it's a standard edition or a data center edition of Windows Server. And you see each time the price. Same thing for SQL 2012 and 2014. I'm not going to elaborate too much on that, but that's a very important thing to remember. If you're going to activate extended security updates from within Azure Arc for one of your SQL Server or Windows servers, you start to pay actually from that moment in time, but you also will get a back billing that starts from the moment that the extended security period started. So keep that in mind. You're not just paying for the month that comes or the month that just passed. You also get a back billing for the months that already passed since that we are in the extended support scenario. Keep that in mind. But it's something that some people get surprised about. Voilà. Let's go a little bit deeper. Maximize the benefits. So typically you have this. You use SPLA for Windows and SQL Server, right? And my story is you might, for some of your Windows Server, continue to use SPLA. For some, you might also switch to CSP. But for SQL Server, probably more and more you will go to CSP. And leverage in that context, of course, Azure Arc. Otherwise, it's not possible. And if you check that out, so I keep it in the middle, whether you do that for Windows Server or not. But the point is, by doing so, the SQL Server starts to contribute to your Azure consumption, the ACR, and it shows up in your reconciliation file in the Partner Center for you to see how much ACR you did actually generate for a customer. Good. Now, until June 2025, until the end of last fiscal year, there was an incentive model that was based on the standard CSP motion. I'll explain what it is. And there was an incentive for customer ads. Well, that is changing. From this fiscal year on, since July the 1st, first of all, the CSP model motion incentives, the standard CSP incentives, for instance, for your SQL Server that you license through a CSP model have been updated, and the concept of customer ads, the 15% that we used to have, is being replaced by another model which is much more interesting. I'll discuss it in a moment, which is called the growth accelerator, and that's really beautiful. Some of you know licensing, you might already know that, but this is really underestimated point. Let me explain. So how does it work? And we zoom in onto the bottom line, indirect reseller. You are typically an indirect reseller, or you are a direct reseller, or a tier one. Well, tier one and direct is not the same thing, but you might have a direct link. You could be tier one, voila. But most of us, you're in indirect, TD SYNNEX. And here you see that in order to get these incentives that I just discussed high level, you need to have, and that is interesting, minimum and just only 25 capability points in the specific solution area. In this case, it would be one of the solution areas related to Azure. You do not need the full 70. You don't need the full partner designation. If you start to have 25 points, you're fine. And for the rest, you need to have a 12-month trailing revenue of $25,000 in Azure. And that is important. So Microsoft looks back to you, see, you are a hoster, and through CSP, you have been generating $25,000, and then you become eligible for the story that I'm about to tell you. Previously in 25, this didn't apply for Azure. That's what I put here. Good. Okay. Let me explain. What you see here is the three big cloud solution areas. At the middle one, you see like the three, the three solution plays, you might say, the infrastructure, data app, innovation, and data and AI. And you actually always see the number of points you can maximum earn per category, performance, skilling, and customer success. Again, the point I just made in my previous slide is you only need 25 points, and they can come from whatever. And why is this important? If you're starting to do business, you might not have customers yet. You might not have performers yet, but you might have all the skilling things already done. You have done the exams. You get even the total 40 points here, and that's enough to get the incentives. And then for the 25,000, so they look back for 6 months. And that's also a point. They look back for the last 6 months. They don't just watch the last month, but if during the last 1 + 5 months, you had indeed somewhere the 25 points, you are eligible. So again, why do I tell this? If you go from SPLA to CSP and you want to get incentives from the ACR you're generating, these are the rules. Okay. Now, the rules high level, the CSP incentives typically is based on 3 levels. There are the core incentives, the 3%, as you will see. There are strategic accelerators. That's not relevant in the context of Azure because in Azure, the accelerator, and there is only one accelerator, that's a customer growth accelerator, applies to any workload. So number 2, you can forget, but it's actually a combination of the core rate, I will explain what it is, and the growth, and that's what you will see. What do we mean with growth? And that's, again, very important. What Microsoft does, they compare each last month with the same month in the year before. They don't compare this month with the previous month. They compare the last month with the same month the last before. If you are generating with your SQL Server all of a sudden a higher ACR, on this extra ACR you get an incentive. The other point is Microsoft does that per individual customer tenant. So they are not looking to you as all your customers. No. They look into each tenants in each Azure subscription. So it's very possible that you are not doing well, but you have just one customer that is doing really well, that you have a month that is higher than a year before the same month. Well, for that customer, for that month, you'll get an incentive. Another important thing is that Microsoft looks at that per solution area. So it's very possible that for that tenant, the customer, then you're not doing fine with modern work and security or business application, but you do for Azure, and they only look for Azure at that point. And that's what I said. You can skip this point. The point is that this is true for anything you do in Azure. Anything. So the growth is being compared for any service you use. So meaning, in the context of Azure Arc, if you start to use SQL, if you start to use one of the Azure Arc paid services, they are all seen as strategic. And for every growth that you make per customer, per month, you'll get incentivized. Very technical, lasting technical, but they really made it really well. Okay. Voilà. And now it comes to the point, that's what I already explained. And here you see it. This is what I want to explain. So typically, if you start to use Azure Arc, the CSP model, you start to generate ACR. Well, on the ACR, for the pay-as-you-go, you get 3%. And typically you take a combination. If you start to do CSP reservation or saving plan, you start to commit per year or even 3 years. Also on that one, you get 3% for a maximum of $150,000. On top of that, the story I just explained, the growth, where we compare month with the previous month in the same month in the previous year, you'll get another extra 7%. So that's what I mean. If you go SPLA, you don't have this scheme. You don't have this earning scheme, this incentive. And that's, again, and remember, this is something you get even for running things on premises, by connecting it to Azure Arc to Azure. But by switching from SPLA to a CSP model, it's beautiful. Voila. All this comes from the incentive guide. There's a URL. This slide compares how it was before in the previous fiscal year. In the previous was 4%, it's now 3%. The reservation was 10%, so it's also 3%, nothing, so it's less in a way. But the big change is that Microsoft doesn't give you incentives for new customers, because the problem with customer ads is that you only get it once. If you get a new customer, you get the 15%. And okay, it was 15%, but now you get growth accelerator. For each customer separately, they actually compare month with the month in the previous year, and you constantly get a growth accelerator. This one is actually the beauty of the beast. Keep that in mind. This will give you a recurring revenue, which is much more interesting than the customer ads that you realize with 25 fiscal year. Okay. So this was a little bit the licensing story. Going back to this one, and that's interesting, is so you generate ACR, you get incentives for it, and on top of that, it counts to your designation score. So you only need 25 points to get the incentives, and by doing it, you get paid through the incentives, and the ACR counts for a designation score. And it counts also if you have a DCO contract, where you also typically get, depending on how your contract was set up, and a reduction in price. Voila. So this might be, from a licensing perspective, some of you might say, I don't like licensing. Well, once you understand licensing, you will see you like licensing, because it's all about the money. Of like people tend to say, it's only for money that the beer starts to dance. If you're a sales professional, this should have convinced you. If you are a decision maker as a hoster on how can I make money with Azure without going to Azure, this should have convinced you. Now, once more, the real value is absolutely with the manageability that comes with Azure Arc. And I'm not going to do this full deck. This is the pitch deck that you can download. It explains once more why you need all this. I'm going to skip that. It explains actually what Azure Arc can do. For SQL Server, all these things are being discussed in the slide deck. Very nice. And basically, it's about three things: about managing your SQL servers, keep your SQL servers secure, and actually also doing the migrations. That's what it does. And then what you see, the single view of SQL, you get like your inventory of everything. You can actually have key performance metrics. So both for things that are running at Azure, in your data center, in the data center of your customer, or even in another cloud, public cloud. As long as you connect the SQL Server to Azure Arc, it's like what you would do also with Windows, but as long as you connect it to Azure Arc, you get this in single pane of glass, this performance metrics, and where you can start leveraging Azure monitoring. You can have automated best practices assessments. So that's also something that comes with Azure. It automatically assesses your SQL servers running on premises and tells you, apart from security, all kinds of best practices that you can apply. So recommendations. And it provides you a lot of cloud disaster recovery features from manageability. From security, there is a story with Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Defender it's called here, but they mean Defender for Cloud. You have the ESUs, of course, that are only available if you go through Azure Arc. And of course, as part of Purview, there is the data compliance story, data compliance story, not governance, that's another thing. That's a feature that you also get through Purview. Purview is about many more other things, but for SQL Server, there is this part too. And then there's a unified sign-in experience I will explain later. And then the migrate story, that is something new. You can, of course, use Azure Migrate, but through Azure Arc, Microsoft provides us, I have separate slides about that, and even a much more convenient way of migrating things. Remember, you keep things on premises. At some point in time, you will want to migrate. And the point is that Azure Migrate could be used for that, or Doctor Migrate. But the point is that by leveraging Azure Arc, you get even a newer option. Some screenshots, that is the inventory that you get. This is the performance metrics that I talked about. This is the best practices assessments that you can do for all your SQL Server workloads. This is the automated backup that you get from Azure, so single pane of glass, also from your backups. This is the story about the failover cluster instances that you manage, also from within the cloud, and again, for things running on premises. That's the beauty of the beast. And the always-on failover cluster that you manage from the cloud. From the security perspective, you have, of course, the Defender for Cloud. Remember the 3 features, post-infrastructure code, but most importantly, the posture management and the threat management, reactive, proactive, that is being provided. And this one is a very interesting one, a little bit technical, but I like it a lot, is the fact that once you do Azure Arc on the SQL Server on premises, you can start to leverage Enter ID, meaning you can have airbag, role-based access to your SQL Server on premises through Enter ID. Yeah? And the nice thing is that the system will also generate managed identities, both for you from a service contacting the SQL Server on premises. So it's like a service principal that you do not have to manage yourself. It's managed by Microsoft. And also when your SQL Server talks to Azure service in the cloud, it's all done through managed identities. So you don't need to maintain your own service principals in Azure Entra yourself. Don't underestimate this one, a very important one. This is again something that is made available through Entra ID. And then of course I cannot repeat myself enough on this one. The ESUs that are being made available and easy to deploy with single click, basically from within Azure portal, very simple. And from the migrate, the point is, first of all, if you think about Azure, at some point in time, you will want to really migrate to Azure with your SQL. Don't keep it on premises, because Azure SQL, think about the managed instance option, for instance, is at some point in time, you'll want to go for that option. The point is, the software is, if you do so, one of the things is that it's, of course, always managed and continuously updated by Microsoft. That's a good thing. Huh? Now, what I wanted to show you is this one. So there are many options to do a migration: Azure Migrate, Doctor Migrate. Behind the scenes, typically it's using the database migration service of SQL, actually. And the new option is through Azure Arc. I'm not going to go too deep on that, but it's like 5 slides. I just go through it, and it shows you in a very nice slide how indeed a migration can even be much more easy to do and much more smooth to do for your SQL servers. Again, this is the phase before you do the lift and shift. It is the phase before you do the rehost and start to leverage PaaS services in the cloud. So the migration assessment that is done for you towards Azure Managed Instance or a SQL database is certainly also the option we'll want to aim for. And from a cost management perspective, it's probably the best option in the long run. So you start from SPLA, you go to CSP, you start to leverage Azure Arc, you start to measure the migration features of Azure Arc, and at some point in time, you're actually going to migrate, and it starts with assessment. It helps you to understand what the connections are. It tells you, well, it tells you very much about what are the best options in the cloud to go for when you migrate, and it actually helps you to do the actual migration. It identifies the client connections, so it knows in which order things needs to be done, the dependencies between servers on premises, so it helps you with that. It gives you all kinds, well, 2 migration methods, which is real-time replication and log shipping. So it's a very sophisticated solution that can be used. Pricing model, this is actually the same slide as I showed you before. So from a pure SQL Server perspective, for L only and for L plus SA or pay-as-you-go, you have this. And what you see in the other left corner is free of charge. On top of that, you have Azure Policy, Azure Monitoring, Log Analytics, Defender for SQL Server, all things that are being licensed separately through a CSP model, pay as you go actually. And again, by doing so, this generates ACR, this generates incentives. This will make your business shine from a dollar-euro perspective. This is actually the same information, but on a slide. License only, L plus SA, or pay as you go, actually the same thing, these two. There is no difference. You see, there is absolutely no difference. And then here, I actually showed this already in euros, but here you see no, I didn't show it for Defender. This is in dollar. If you want to use the Defender for SQL Server, for instance, and you have Defender for a lot of things, but Defender for SQL Server in this context is the one you will want to aim for. And also there you have a per instance or below or an SQL outstar of Azure, the monthly rate. Okay. So, voilà, almost there. I still have some nice things to share with you, but we are actually nicely on schedule. We will probably even close the session a little bit sooner, which is always good news. By going to a CSP model, by going to an environment that is being managed through Azure Arc in Azure, you have all the benefits I just discussed, but also from a cost management perspective, you also all of a sudden get all kinds of benefits. Your Azure hybrid benefit can be leveraged, which brings typically the cost of, in the context of buying pay-as-you-go versions of SQL Server for running on premises. You can even use your hybrid benefits for SA customers. Use pay-as-you-go license via Arc. That is typically the CapEx, OpEx story, where you could at some point in time go to even a SQL managed instance as available. Right sizing resource, that's very much related to monitoring and even automatically right size. That's certainly, especially for Windows servers, virtual machines, the storage also that at some point in time that is being used for that. So you control actually your invoice. The tagging and the cost allocation, think about a tag that, for instance, is used for cost center in your organization or the organization of customer. You could have both tags that are for you valid and probably more relevant because you always see it in the tenant of the customer. Remember that these things happen in the Azure tenants of the customers, the subscription of the customers, and there you might have a level to policies, all kinds of tax at the highest level in your management groups, and then actually apply these tax also on resources running in the data center of the customer or your data center. And actually from a governance perspective, manageability perspective, this helps you. And a tag can be used for cost allocation. You can of course set budgets and have alerts automated generated if you go over a certain budget. No surprises. You can leverage reserved instances and the saving plans. And remember, you also get the 3% on that one too. You have automated resource lifecycle. That's typically what you do to all kinds of, here they talk about Kubernetes. In the context of a Kubernetes cluster, you have all kinds of means to have automated provisioning and so on, and even auto healing, a lot of things that you start leveraging from within the cloud, things that are important. Monitor hybrid cost in a single, that's the whole point. Use Azure Cost Management. So Azure Cost Management, and especially also Azure Advisor, that is not only looking at it from a cost perspective, but also from a performance perspective, from a reliability perspective, from an operational excellence perspective. You'll get all kinds of recommendation how you can things better. And very much, I remember the Azure policy story is without any doubt something that should convince you that you actually have a central Azure policy that you actually can set through your hierarchy in the subscriptions, and that these apply actually also on the things that you run on premises. Copilot can be used, of course, on that. And then probably one of the most exciting topics, but it's still in preview, but you will want to read about it. I remember what I said, SQL Server is without any doubt the workload that you will most probably want to move, well, not move, but connect to Azure Arc to Azure and go readily to a CSP model, not to SPLA. But the other thing is this Windows Server, and specifically RDS. And what is the future of RDS? That is, of course, Azure Virtual Desktop. Now, Azure Virtual Desktop typically requires Azure Local, yeah, or requires Azure as the place where you will host your session host. Well, the good news is Microsoft will allow you to keep your on-premises infrastructure, including VMware and Nutanix and physical servers, and have these to become your session hosts, connected to Azure Arc to Azure, and manage all the things we discussed here from there. And I have a screenshot of it in a moment. So this is absolutely what is coming. And here's some high-level explanation with some more detail coming soon. Azure Virtual Desktop for hybrid environments. That's what I say. And this slide is what it shows. So from within Azure, you will be able to add an extension, and one of the extensions is the Azure Virtual Desktop. So you can actually add to, you have a Windows server in your data center, and through Azure Arc, you add an extension that makes that Windows server a session host for your host pool as part of your AVD setup. This, especially the technical people, should excite you, because once more, until previously, you would need to do everything in Azure, or you would need to deploy an Azure local instance, which is certainly also a good option, but this is also coming soon as an option. And here they explain from left to right on premises, RDS, you could actually do it cloud connected. So migrate, forget about this slide. The last one is, of course, AVD fully in the cloud, and Windows 365 is absolutely the SaaS option on top of myself. But what you see here, that's the point we want to make, is that you actually have the combination of AVD and Windows Server and yeah, fully in the cloud. But that is the option. The second one is that you actually can keep everything on premises, Arc enable the server, and actually have Azure Virtual Desktop, the session host running. So it's about this option to the left. And at some point in time, for some of them, you will go there or fully go to this option. Voilà, that's the point. Voilà. And then to end very quickly, if you want to learn about Azure Arc, and set up Azure Arc, and yeah, it takes some knowledge and skills to do so. And I know what I'm talking about because I've been doing this myself. I've been running workshops, hands-on workshops based on the Jumpstart Arc, the Arc Jumpstart resources. Check out especially this video of I forget his name. Of this wonderful guy that tells you how it works. And actually, that is the URL. Go to Azure Arc Jumpstart, learn about it, watch the video. And what is so nice about it, it's actually giving you, without the hassle of learning everything yourself and setting up everything yourself, it creates an Azure Arc environment. And there are many options, actually, all kinds of options. It's very sophisticated. You can go very far, but it's all done through very simple, just one-click scripts, and that sets up an environment. And then you have like all kinds of steps you can go through to get acquainted to what you have been realizing. So if you're new to Azure Arc and you're technical, this should be a no-brainer. Start here. If you didn't like the licensing story, well, you should like this. If you didn't like the licensing story, you don't like this, you're probably in the wrong business. Voilà. Voilà, Azure Arc, that was it. I think I covered quite a lot. I've brought together a lot of resources in one slide deck. Probably some of you didn't like everything, but then again, I'm absolutely sure that also the licensing part is very important to understand. At least if you didn't understand it, make sure that somebody in your company understands it. Contact me, contact TD SYNNEX, let us know where you need follow-up, and so we can make the business case for you, for your customer, but especially for you as a partner to become future-proof, even with your own data center nicely connected to Azure Arc, to Azure, leveraging CSP, and gradually go away from SPLA. It's not replacing it fully. SPLA is certainly an interesting option, and in some cases the better option, but for many of the workloads, I think CSP is the option to go for. Voilà. Don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all. That's at least what I try. I love to push the bar. Every day I want to learn something. Every day I want to get a new insight. And that's what this session is all about. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop recording now, but I'm still available for questions that you might have. Let me check the discussions. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look up my name, connect. I love to be connected as much as possible with people attending my sessions. If you have questions, ask them here, ask them to Sarah or any other representative from TD SYNNEX. Let us know what you think, what you miss, what you need to know.